welcome to It's Not About Me. I'm Lance Barrow, CBS Sports coordinating producer for many, many years, and I'm honored to be here with the legendary coach of TCU, Hall of Fame coach, Coach Gary Patterson. Gary, it's great to be here.
Well, it is, Lance. You know, I've sat in Colonial Country Club and listened to, not only became your friend, but also listened to you for years. And so, you know, the statement is, it's not about me, but really it is going to be about him and me, but telling stories about other people. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it back to Lance, because to be honest with you, he called me legendary and he just called himself a producer, but I'll be honest with you, he's not. And really what this show is all about is really about telling stories, good stories about our friends, maybe things that you never knew happened behind the scenes, and really let you know right off the bat. And so we tried to, you don't know, but not only was he a golf producer, but he was also an NFL producer. And I learned more about golf and football sitting around at lunch than I ever did anything else. So Lance, this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to getting a chance to do this, but this is not about me. It's going to be about you. So why don't you tell them how you started?
Well, it's not supposed to be about me. It's about you. But I will, if you really beg me to tell people.
I am begging.
Okay, good. You know, and he's the coach, so I do I'm a good.
Put him in, coach, right?
I'm a coachable guy. I'm a great teammate. And so anything my coach tells me, I'll do it. Well, I grew up right outside of Fort Worth, Texas, in Colleyville, before it was Colleyville, before DFW was built. And my dad was a dairy farmer. And I remember I would go to the Colonial Golf Tournament when I was in high school. And I actually taught my way into caddying at the Colonial Golf Tournament a few times. And I noticed at the time, and this is the early 70s, there was a lot of young people running around with ABC badges on, ABC Sports. And every time the Fort Worth tournament would come to Colonial, or the Byron Nelson in Dallas, the Dallas paper and the Fort Worth papers would write a story about this young producer who grew up in Midland, who was this whiz kid named Terry Jastrow, who went on to be a legendary producer at ABC Sports, is married to the actress Ann Archer, and a dear friend. And I used to read this article, and I saw all these kids running around with ABC badges on when I was in high school. And I thought, man, this sounds like the greatest job in the world. And so I was actually caddying my senior year of high school at Fort Worth Christian. And the guy I was caddying for missed the 36-hole cut. So like any 18-year-old, I decided to go ask a major network if I could work for them. So I went out on Saturday morning. This was 1973, May of 73. And I asked this gentleman, could I work for you guys for ABC Sports? And he looked at me and he said, have you ever worked for us before? And I thought about what my mom would want me to say. And I was about to graduate from Fort Worth Christian, tell the truth. And I said, yes, I've worked for you guys before. And he said, have you ever done lower third graphics? Well, my grandmother's voice came into my head and said, if you don't tell the truth and they find out you're lying, it's going to be worse if you just told the truth. And I said, yep, I've done lower third graphics. And I didn't know what lower third graphics is. A few years ago, I found out it's the lower third graphic you see on the screen, usually a name or a score or something like that. So I worked for them that week. And they said to me on Sunday night, the guy said, hey, you did a great job. Anytime you want to work for us, give us a call. He gave me his card. Like us at CBS Sports, we hire a lot of local people, or have a lot of people that kind of travel that just does it part-time and does it for fun. So I went off to college, Abilene Christian, played football and baseball, still hung out and did some things for ABC Sports, actually caddied on the PGA Tour a couple of summers for a golfer named Jim Simons, who almost won the U.S. Open as an amateur, went to Wake Forest with Curtis Strange and Jay Haas and Laney Watkins and all those guys. So my junior year of college, I was working at the Byron Nelson tournament in Dallas, and a friend of mine said CBS is looking for people to work next week, and this was, 1976. So I went out on Monday, kind of like what I did 3 years earlier, asked a gentleman named Chuck Will, who was a legendary guy in our industry, who was the right-hand person for the legendary producer Frank Shakinian, who created Golf TV, never looked at me, never opened his eyes. He was sunning himself. And he said, come back Thursday and I'll give you something to do. I came back on Thursday. He said, the guy that usually works for Summerall, Pat Summerall, is not here. He's a Canadian. He's getting ready for the Olympics in Montreal for the CBC. So I'm going to put you up on the tower with Pat Summerall. And he said, the reason I'm doing
That's
this,
awesome.
Lance, he says, Pat's a Southerner, you're a Southerner. Pat played football. I hear you play football in college. And you're a big guy and the wind blows hard here in Fort Worth, you'll keep the 18th tower from blowing away. So I went up on the tower. I realized while I was walking up to the tower that sitting next to Pat Summerall was a legendary pro golfer, legendary analyst, Ken Venturi, who won the 1964 U.S. Open, and I'm scared to death. So eventually Pat Summerall shows up. I stand up, and his old football partner, Tom Brickshaw, always said, if somebody was going to tell me I'm dying, I'd want it to come out of Pat's voice because it's going to sound better than anybody else's voice. So I stood up and I said, Mr. Summerall, I'm Lance Barrow. I'm going to work for you this weekend. Any advice, anything you want to tell me? And he looked at me and he said, don't call me Mr. Summerall. Don't get excited. And hand me a beer out of that cooler. And I ended up traveling everywhere he went for 6 years. And that's what started my career, and moved to New York and on and on and on. So that's kind of a long story, but that's how I got started in this industry. It was funny. I was speaking at a university a few years ago, and I was telling this story, and no one had ever called me on this, but this young girl, and if I would have had the capabilities on that spot, I would have hired her at CBS in the moment. She looked at me and said, obviously you lied to get your career started. So really, how do we get into this business? And I said, no one has ever called me on that, but that's pretty good. So tell me about, how did Gary Patterson grew up in Kansas? How did you decide I'm going to be a coach?
Gary Patterson, 40 plus years of college coaching. Well, really what I started, I didn't have much choice. When I was born, my Uncle Ray played with Bill Parcells at Wichita State, and they had a Wichita State little football in my deal. My Uncle Harold played at KU, was a four-sport letterman. Both Ray and Harold were both All-Americans at Dodge and Garden City Junior Colleges. Harold went on to be a four-sport letterman at KU, the youngest player in the Canadian Hall of Fame. So from this little town of 125 people in Kansas, you just kind of had all these people. Everybody said, well, a lot of people, you've won a lot of wars, did a lot of things, but to be honest with you, I'm down the totem pole in the Patterson house, to be honest with you. And so, I went to Dodge City. I got hurt my knee, but got it fixed, and went on to Kansas State and played. And I don't know if you remember this, but Jim Dickey was the head football coach back then, and he redshirted all the 21 seniors. It was like 15 starters, and then so in that year, that was my junior year. I played because they had redshirted all these seniors, and then when they came back, and you had all these guys that I was playing kind of an outside linebacker, strong safety position, and I was 5'10", 5'11", 212 pounds, and they were 6'4", 245 pounds, the guys that were going to come off of it. And I said, well, I think I'll become a student coach. Asked if I could do that, and a guy by the name of Gary Darnell, that really is probably like a second dad, said, great. So they allowed me to do it. And, I went out to the airport at 4 a.m. back then, where you still had you had to bring it home and break it all down and do all of it. And so he took me to a place called Tennessee Tech with him. We went to the first bowl game in Kansas State history in 1981, played Wisconsin, and got beat. It was probably one of the coldest days of my life. We had to have baggies over your feet. I mean, water was up 4 or 5 inches in the Independence Bowl. And so went there, and youngest guy on the staff, so you know that what it means. It all rolls downhill. So we only won 3 games in 3 years, and he decided to leave. And so I went to these offense defensive camps in California, where they'd have 100. Nowadays you can't do it because of the rules, but they'd have 100 Division I coaches. There was one up in Northern California, either at Menlo or Sonoma, one down in Riverside, and you'd have over 1,000 players, and it was a full contact camp. And so we would go, and they'd only pay us about $200 a week, and then we'd travel. And I met these coaches at UC Davis, Jim Soker, which is a legendary coach, Bob Foster, Bob Biggs, all of them. Jim Soker was very close with Bill Walsh. Everything they did on offense at the 49ers, they did at UC Davis. And everything they did on defense came from the Dallas Cowboys, the 4-3 flex back with Tom Landry, and Chicago Bears with the group Buddy Ryan. And so every coach would go for 2 weeks. That's what he did on his vacation. Coach would go and he would go study him, because he could tell his wife, he could tell her that it was going to work all right because we're going on vacation, but I can get this written off because I'm going to go study football, right? And so really in a matter of 8 months, I probably learned more football than I ever did. Nobody ever raised their voice. There was no whistles. Everybody was called by their first name, except for Coach Soker. They had won like 21 straight championships. And the Cowboys kind of used UC Davis as a testing site. They would give them ideas and they would work on it. Well, it was one of those situations where, I went there and they said, well, we'll pay you we'll pay you $1,500 for the season. What they didn't tell me was that they weren't going to pay me till the end of the season. A normal coach story, right? So I got an emergency teaching certificate, and in the morning they'd call me 4:30 in the morning, and I would go substitute teach. And you as a young guy, there's no way I'm going to eat 3 meals a day, right? So you got it into 14, 2 meals a day. And so Jim Bolinas owned Mr. B's at the time, and he was everybody at Davis had another job except for about 3 or 4 coaches. They were full-time. And so I attended bar on Sunday and Monday, and I was a terrible bartender. But at the end of the night, you got a sandwich. You could go into the locker and make yourself a sandwich. So that was 2 sandwiches. So now we're down to 12 meals that I had to do for the rest of the week. And so it kind of started. I sat at these offense defensive camps, and a guy by the name of Steve Hagan said, they got an opening at Cal Lutheran University down in Thousand Oaks for another legendary coach by the name of Bob Shout. And I went.
Cowboys practice.
Yeah, that's where the Cowboys practice. And so I went and interviewed, and he hired me. And my first 15 years, I moved from 10 different places. From there, I went to Pittsburgh State. They were in a 56-game regular season winning streak. Then I went back to a place called Sonoma State, and we recruited Larry Allen from Compton, California. That's really another story some other time. And then ended up going to with Craig Morton to this thing called this professional spring league that only lasted 6 weeks, and then they shut it down. And so I was out of a job. And so a guy by the name of Dick Bumpus that I'd coached with, that was a 2-time All-American Arkansas, called me, and I went and worked at Utah State. From there, we went to the Naval Academy. And then there was a guy by the name of John Somsky that was watching us Navy play Notre Dame. He was at the game, and we played really well on defense. And Coach Franchione, that had moved on, it was now the head coach at New Mexico. And he called him on the phone. He says, "You need to call Gary." He said, "What they're doing on defense." He said, "It was like we were like ahead like 13-10 at halftime, playing really well on defense and doing things." And so ended up going to New Mexico. And then when Coach Fran came to TCU, and then now the other 26 years. But yeah, it was what people forget, as you know, Lance. There's somebody along the way that helped us all get where we need to. And I can name the names of Gary Darnell and, Coach Dickey. I mean, if you go down the list, Charlie Weatherby that brought me along to the Naval Academy, and Dennis Franchione. And so, there's just people out there. And I think that's one of the reasons why you and I talked about doing this podcast is there's so many stories behind the scenes, and everybody always lives in the now anymore. And for me, why I'm really excited about it is to be able to tell the stories of a lot of these guys that made a difference not only in college golf, and in college football and the NFL and doing everything, but also, and they kind of get passed away. They get written about in books, but nobody remembers them anymore. And so, there's anybody that can tell a great story, you're one of them. So,
well, it's funny. I have two stories made me think about when you were talking about it. Dick Vermeil, who came to work for CBS after he left being the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. He was really the first specialty teams coach in the NFL. So he was coaching at a junior college outside of San Francisco. George Allen, who was coaching the LA Rams, asked him to come down to talk to him about coaching. So he went down. He offered him the first, really, it wasn't really called that, but ended up being the first ever specialty teams coach in the NFL. Dick went back up home and said, I took the job, we're moving to LA. And his wife, Carol, said, well, what are you going to make? He goes, oh, shoot, I forgot to ask you. And he found out he was going to take a $4,000 pay cut to go work for the LA Rams. And, it is amazing. I feel so blessed and so fortunate in my life that someone like Pat Summerall, took a liking to me. I can go back. Obviously, my parents had a great influence on my life and on my career because, my parents had no clue what I was talking about. I wanted to be in TV. I didn't know what a producer was. A producer, just everybody I ran around that was a producer looked cool. They were the first guys who I saw wear shoes with no socks. And a lot of them walked around with safari jackets. So I thought, that's cool. And then another one, the great legendary producer Bob Stinner used to hang out at the Playboy Mansion. So I thought, no, this is a pretty cool job. I want to be a producer because those guys are unbelievable. And it's amazing because both of us could sit here for hours and talk about people that influenced us and who had either direct or indirect influence on us. And, I think about why did Chuck Will, who didn't look at me, and then all of a sudden decide I'm going to put him on the 18th tower. I didn't know this until years later. Years later, Chuck Will told me, I still remember we were in Philadelphia having dinner. And he said to me, I've never told you this, but he said that Sunday night at Colonial, Pat Summerall said to me at the airport, he said, Chuck, that kid that you had worked for me, I think he's going to do something in this industry. I want you to make sure he's with me as much as you can let him be there. And, I never knew that. Pat never told me that. And, one of my biggest honors in my life was when Pat passed away, which I never thought Pat Summerall would ever pass away, just like I never thought John Madden would, because they were bigger than life to me. His family asked John Madden and myself to be the only non-family minister to speak at his funeral, which was a very intimidating moment. But, you think about why would a guy like Pat Summerall, who was huge in our industry, why would a person like Chuck Will or anybody else I would talk about take an interest in some kid that just walked off the street? Same thing with you, with coaches that you were around and other people. I mean, not just TV people that has influenced my life, but like other people in your life. Like think about, real quickly, tell me about someone that made you, or you think about how you got to where you got to be.
Yeah, I think what we're both saying, and I was just thinking while you were talking about it, the thing that when I talk to corporations or I talk to young people, I think one of the things, everybody wants to move up the ladder really quick and they want a different title and they want this and that. But the ones that end up being great, I think you and I, we are products of this. Is we started where we started and we honed our craft. It's one of those things. I never wanted to be any more when I was an assistant. I didn't want to be any more than just be a great assistant. You know, I still had aspirations. I wanted to be a coordinator. I still had, you know, all of it, but you got to be a good soldier. It's one of those things you just do that. And that's what I tell people all the time. I said, you need to do it. The one thing that I never wanted any of my players or even my own sons to come back and say is, hey, why didn't you tell me about this? And I think one of the things you do a great job of when I listen to you and do it, and I tried to, you know, people that are really good at what they do is just to make sure that they understand, hey, the best thing anybody can do for you is to tell you the truth. And you know, that was the one thing that Gary Darnell, you know, I screwed up a situation in a game, and I was the youngest guy, and I was in charge of punt return, and there was two guys that were on the staff. One was, and again, I won't mention names of this because it's not as much of a positive, but they both wanted to return punts because he'd have been an All-American at Nebraska. He was an All-American punt returner, and the other guy played at Washington and Colorado, coached at Colorado, and I was the youngest guy. Well, we weren't very good at it, and so Coach came in and he said, who's in charge of punt block and punt return? I said, I am. He said, well, then we're not very good at it. You need to fix it. We had an off week. Well, I just went into blocking. I said, well, then we're going to block punts because we don't have a great returner back. Well, in the last 7 games, we blocked like 9 punts. You know, we still didn't win very many ball games, but we made ourselves a lot more competitive. And I think sometimes I think people look over the little things. You know, people say, well, how did you become so creative in football or in music and do it all? To be honest with you, I go back to the little, you remember those old football games that were electronic and you put them on and you turn it on and it buzzed and the little pieces moved all over the place? I mean, I played with that till the electrical part didn't work, and then I tapped it. And I would draw plays and you would try to do them. And I think one of the things that with kids nowadays is, you know, I think sometimes we hinder them. You know, we don't let them do all the things we need to. And I think you miss. I go back and I'm going back and going, my mom would have said that thing's broke, threw it and threw it out where I am right now. And that's a very simple thing. But at the end of the day, or in music, if they'd said when I was in 6th grade, and you know, I'm sure we didn't sound great, but we played wedding dances and we played different things and we had a great time with it. And I think all that stuff leads up to where we are now. I think it's and why even do a podcast like this, right? But I think the reason that you do something like this, which I think is really cool, is for the simple reason to be able to highlight so many other people. Not only did they help us become where we got to, where we were in this day and age, but also the next up and coming guys are like it, like Dan Lanning when he put the 12th guy on the field to burn off seconds. And up to 2 years ago, I didn't know who Dan Lanning was.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, I think to be able to highlight and bring forward people that maybe people in golf didn't know anything about football and people in football didn't know about in golf, and highlight, because I mean, I could sit for hours. I mean, you just named 20 names of people that just helped you as you came up. That I knew who Pat Summerall was. I knew guys like that, but I didn't know the other 6 that you named off, because that's not what my my path was. And so I think this is a lot of fun for me and you and I. You know, there's a lot of things, but that we are, but not being talkable. You know, we guys that don't like to talk. I don't think that's exactly what
Well,
all
you know,
about.
it's funny. This podcast is called "It's Not About Me," but actually, the first or so 20-something minutes, it's actually been about us. But you know, it's our podcast. We can do what we want to do. And so, I don't really like talking about myself. I know Coach Patterson doesn't either. But sometimes, you know, I don't want you to turn on this podcast and go, who are these 2 stiffs? You know, I'm sitting next to a Hall of Fame coach. You know, one of the things that I have been very blessed to be able to do, I was around the greatest coaches that have coached in football, in basketball, leaders, like being around you, Gary, and listen to you and your philosophy on how to do things and this and that. And, I look at my job as the producer. I'm the head coach of this broadcast. I have announcers, I have production people, I have technical people. We have 250 people running around. And just like you, when you would get prepared for a football game, we're getting prepared for a game. And I would tell people, we'd finish on Sunday night or Sunday afternoon. The next morning, just like a football game, we would start planning for Sunday, getting ready, listen to what Jim Nantz, or before that was Vern Lundquist and Randy Cross, or Dick Enberg and Dan Dierdorf, and then Jim Nantz and Phil Simms, getting ready, just like the coaches, the two teams we were going to do. We studied and we game planned just like they do. And I remember a famous owner I was having lunch with a couple days before one of the playoff games. And I said to him, and I'm not going to say his name, he said, it was myself and another person and this owner. I said, Mr. So-and-so, we'll see you tomorrow. We're coming out to watch practice and talk to the coaches and the players and watch some tapes. He goes, well, didn't you guys do us like 2 weeks ago? I said, oh, yeah. He said, so why are you guys doing this? I said, well, the team you're playing, you've already played them twice. So are you still practicing against these teams? and it's one of those things, Gary, I wish my brain would have caught up with my mouth, because I really shouldn't have said that. But it kind of upset me.
I would have said touche.
I would, and he looked at, he looked at me in his way, and I love this man. He looked at me and said, that makes sense. That makes sense. And, people don't realize the amount of time and effort, like in our jobs, which really I don't care, because people don't need to know. And people don't realize the hours that you as a coach and your staff and your players put in to getting ready for a game. They, like I've had pro golfers, I walk into a room and they go, you guys doing this tournament? And it's another one I wish my brain would catch up with my mouth, but it's kind of like insulting to me.
I'm gonna use that. That line's going in my book.
It's insulting to me. I go, yeah, we are, but I just figured the 20 other golf tournaments that we do is just not enough. I figured I got to come out and see you guys this week.
So how many? Tell them really, probably out of 365 days, Lance, how many days were you gone from home?
I have
football and golf, all of it.
We did 43 weeks of football and golf. In golf, you're on the road all week long, because a lot of people don't realize on the cable part on Thursday and Friday, mostly now Golf Channel, and we do their telecast. They bring in a couple of announcers, and then we do the telecast. All the CBS people, just like when NBC is doing a telecast, they do it, and they're part of Golf Channel, but they do it for Golf Channel. So we're on the air, in some weeks, like doing the PGA Championship or other tournaments, because of the hours that we're on the air, we might do 2 months of a football season just in 4 days on golf, because you're on the air for so long.
Yeah.
Unlike other sports, a lot of people don't realize this, and I tell people this: golf is the hardest sport to do on television. And people look at me and go, some of the best naps I get on Sunday afternoon is watching you golf. and I one day I finally got kind of insulted by it, and I said, I asked the person who said that to me, I said, explain that to me. And they said, you got to remember, all week long we're getting bombarded. Emails, texts, bad news, good news, whatever. We know when we turn on your golf tournament, it's going to be someplace pretty. It's going to be soothing. You know, it's going to be green. The weather's going to be nice. The birds are chirping. The music is great. And we just kind of fall asleep. And I remember once talking to Urban Myers, the legendary coach, and I told him I was coming back up to Columbus to see a game the next fall. And he said, well, what you got to do, Lance, is come and have breakfast with me here at Muirfield Village Golf Club in Columbus, Ohio, Jack Nicklaus's course, and where they have the memorial tournament, because every Friday I walk over from the 7th hole and I work out at 5 o'clock to about 6. I take a sauna, take a steam. I go have breakfast with the head pro, Larry Dornish. And then at about 9:30, Lance, I walk back to Vietnam. And it took me a while to figure out what he was talking about. And I said, I realized that's the only couple of hours in his life it's peaceful. And that's what I was thinking about that. But, you know, you think about golf, there's more than one stage. So you're doing 18 stages. There's more than, nobody ever stops playing. Like doing a football game, when we go to commercial, technically they're supposed to not play until we come back. That's not always the perfect world, but we try to do it that way. There's more than one ball. Nobody has numbers on their backs, and there's no boundaries. And I remember the legendary Frank Shakinian, who created Golf TV, who is really my mentor. Somebody was interviewing him, and he said, they asked him, why are you guys so much better than everybody else? And believe me, and I say this in loving terms, his ego was such that he was going to tell them how great we were. And he looked at the reporter and said,
he's going to get mad at you when he sees this.
Well, luckily he passed away. No, not luckily, but sadly he passed away a few years ago. But I've told him this before. He said, what makes us better than everybody else, we know when to go to commercial. And I went, that's the meaning of life? That's what I need to know. And believe me, after doing it, you know, and what he was saying was, you got to know who plays quickly, who plays slowly, how far it is to walk from green to tee. You know, all this stuff comes into play at golf where you don't have in other sports. Yeah. And so, you know, that's what makes golf so hard and so difficult as opposed to football. But to go back to your question, I was probably on the road probably 43, 44 weeks out of the year. You know, I tell the story.
What is it, 62, 60, what's the number?
52.
52 weeks?
Yeah.
So, yeah, 42 out of 52.
Yeah. So what I would always tell the story, we would do either the AFC Championship game or the Super Bowl, and we'd have an after party, and our crew would all gather around, and I'd say, you know, what a great season, what a great game, thank you all. I want to wish some of you who are in this room, you know, back then it might be 400, 500, 600 people. I want to wish some of you who are going off to do basketball, hockey, and baseball, I'll see you in the fall. For most of you in this room, I'll see you tomorrow in San Diego when we start golf. And then we'd end golf in the end of August, and I'd say, well, we'll see you guys to wherever our football game is going to be.
Well, you know, that's what Kelsey says. She said, you can come home. You know, when I went down and consulted for Texas and then came back after all the years, and she said, but you got to remember now, I married you when you were working 18 to 20 hours a week. I married you for better, for worse, but not for lunch.
Yeah.
She said, so you can come home, but she said, you've got to be gone 3 to 5 hours a day and preferably about 7. And so that's what everybody's on me, well, you're playing all this golf. Now I said, well, I played more golf in the last 2 years than I played in 62 years that I did it. And so for all you that were giving me such a bad time of how bad a golfer I was, okay, I think even on the Golf Channel, you guys did me, and I think they said I was
Peter Costas.
Yeah, what he said to me, and I wanted to hit an 8-iron, but he had me doing a 4-iron. He said, when your spine is you know, all different, going different ways, spina bifida, whatever it is. He said, yeah, and so I said, so my whole goal is now to go from I was like a 29. You know, I also got smarter too, Lance. I got down to a 5. And then I figured when you go out to the course, you can lose a lot of money with a 5, even if you play well. So I've learned from some very good teachers how to manage your handicap.
Yes.
So I'm now back, like to 7.6. I need to really get to between an 8 and a 9 because that's probably a 10 on a normal day. But it's you know I was always jealous so you could go all these pretty places you were talking about and it was calm, and I had to watch it on TV and you were there.
Well, but I don't remember a lot of people coming to a lot of other cities. I'm not going to disparage those cities that we were in. Yes, a lot of people look at Pebble Beach. A lot of people look at Los Angeles. A lot of people look at Augusta National and other places. But we got to go to a lot of great places. But there was also some that ended up being great places, but wasn't that great. This podcast that we're going to do, it's not about me, and even though for the last 40 minutes it's been really about us.
I don't know. We've mentioned them a lot of great names though.
Well, we have, but we really kind of, as Frank Shaginian would say, when I would say, "Boy, this feature is really good," Frank, he would say, "Don't fall in love with your work." I think we've kind of fallen in love with each other even more than we have. But but we don't have anybody to interview, so we might as well just talk amongst ourselves like we're having lunch.
Well, I would tell you this: some guys out there in the professions. I could tell you, I'm way proud of Jerry Keel. Here's a guy that was at Minnesota, had to retire because of his health. And he went several places as an analyst. He ended up with me at TCU, and when stepped aside, he became the interim head coach, and an AD out there saw that he could still handle it and took him to New Mexico State. And he took him to 2 straight bowl games in 60 years. And now he and Tim Beck and a few players, with this portal as they're at Vanderbilt. And the last 2 weeks they've beaten Alabama and they've beaten Kentucky and they beat Virginia Tech at the beginning of the season. So you watch, and I think one of the cool things about this is that everybody's looking for the new young thing. And just in the short bit of time, I've been able to listen to you for years, but hopefully what people get from the start of this podcast that we're going to do is to understand that Lance Barrow has unbelievable amount of information, great information about people, and think about how many people golf and the way you guys ran the truck in golf and in the NFL football, how you ran the truck and how you told the stories and how you were part of their lives. And I think that's the whole thing. I go back to winning the Rose Bowl, and how all everybody talked about it was 50,000 TCU fans or people there that were cheering for us. They had tears in their eyes because they had went through the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s and on up of not winning. Actually, 30s did because they won a national championship from 35 to 38. But TCU did. But to think about all the things that you've been able, stories you've been able to tell, and I think that's one of the coolest things that I think that we're going to get a chance to get accomplished is to be able to tell the stories behind the scenes that nobody else knew about, and talk about people that weren't the shiniest penny, but they probably were the most valuable piece of penny, probably the most valuable penny in the pocket, but nobody knew about it because they didn't speak for themselves. And so that's kind of about what it is. It's not about me, right?
Yeah, my 2 daughters, Katie and Caroline, they've been on me for years to do a podcast and write a book. And
I'd read it.
Well, yeah, I don't, I kind of let other people, I have a dear friend I went to college with who's probably sold hundreds of millions of books, Max Lucado out of San Antonio, Jim Nantz had a New York bestseller. I always think, I'll let those guys write the books and stuff. I probably should have wrote a book about restaurants because I always say to people, other than I'm a, good friend, good father, something like that, John Madden gave me my ultimate compliment, one of his books, that he said, no one works a restaurant better than Lance Barrow does. And so, I should have done that. My friend Jeffrey Strauss, who owns a great restaurant in Del Mar, California, Pamplemousse, which I hope will get him on one day to talk about food and sports and his brother Bill Strauss, who started Pro Flowers. We can talk about business, but he also had the great racehorse a couple of years ago, Hot Rod Charlie. When it gets appropriate on this podcast, we'll have them on and talk about horse racing and business and how do you start a successful business like he did. But, you know, it's one of those things where I've been fortunate to be around a lot of people just like you have. We have known a lot of people in sports and outside of sports. I will say, as a kid who grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, in Colleyville on a dairy farm, who parents, Gene and Dorothy Barrow, loved TCU. Neither one of them went to school there. Loved TCU, had season tickets there for about 40 years. I was cleaning out something the other day. My youngest daughter was, Caroline, and she found this box of stuff. One was a colonial program with Arnold Palmer and Gary Player's signature
Oh, that's
on it.
cool.
And then the other one was a ticket stubs for season tickets to TCU. And I don't know when it was, like 1970 or 71. They were $24 for the whole season tickets. I figure that's about what they are now at TCU too. You know, on top of
These guys can probably tell you that's not true.
The donations that you have to give. But it was so, you know, my mom and dad, we would go see 2 Southwest Conference games in a day. So I always loved college football and loved being around TCU and that sort of stuff. But I would say, and I'm going to get to what I think your true love is. I'm going to get to that in a second, but I just want to give you a compliment. I think what you did for the school at TCU and not only their alumni base, the players that came through there, how you handled your business, how you made that school a national school on the biggest stage, which also in turn helped the community and helped the city of Fort Worth, Texas, which we both love. We love our city that we get to live in and I'm from. I think it's amazing that will carry on long after both of us have said goodbye. And I want to thank you for that.
Well, thanks.
But before, I'm not going to let you respond to that because you're going to just tell me. You're going to tell me you're out of your mind, and we're going to move on. But I know one thing that I don't think a lot of people know. Some people do if they paid attention to you over the last few years, and really more than that, you love music. Yep. And you love writing music, and you've been involved with some great music from writers who write music and great entertainers. You've been involved. So you brought your guitar. I didn't have anything to bring. I don't play any instruments, and I should have brought a plate of food or something because that's really what I know more than anything. But you know, and I don't, you know, so I'm kind of lost. But when I walked in here and I saw your guitar, I was like, what are we going to have, a concert or something? And, you know, what am I going to say? You know, Capitol recording star, 3-time Grammy winner, Gary Patterson. Or like Willie Nelson told Jim Nantz once, you can introduce me, Jim, however you want, but I think the best way is to say, hey, here's Willie. But you have your guitar. Instead of you carrying it around, why don't you do something?
Well, let me just say this to you. Number one, you know, I couldn't get my wife to marry me with my looks, so I had to be able to dance. I had to be able to play music. I had to be able to do all of it. I would tell you one story before, if you don't mind me doing, because you were talking about how you get there, guys behind the scenes. You know, one of the greatest probably sports stories I ever was part of was the December before we played the Rose Bowl. And he's still handling himself. It's about Andy Dalton, but he's still handling himself. I think this is his 14th or 15th season in the NFL. And we would always, at the beginning of December, you know, before the coaches went recruiting and we had to do finals because we couldn't practice during finals, we'd have this team meeting, and we'd gotten beaten in the Fiesta Bowl, so we'd went to a BCS game, you know, the year before. And so I put up the counter and said, well, here's when we're going to do all this, and here's when we're going to practice. And here's where we're going to stop, and we're going to go home. You guys can go home for Christmas. And he held up his hand and he said, well, is that in stone? And I said, well, no, I thought maybe he wanted more time, right? He said, hey, coach, if it's okay with you, we've been seniors, we've been talking. He says, we got the rest of our lives to spend Christmas with our families, but we're only going to get one chance to win a Rose Bowl. And to be honest with you, head coaches get too much credit. The assistants we had on the staff through all those years at TCU, and then the players. And my job, as soon as he said that, and so instead of practicing in the morning on the 23rd and then going home for a day and a half, we practiced in the morning. We got everybody ready to go. Anybody that was close could go home. And then we got up in the morning on the 24th and we went to LA. And we got there, got settled in. We had our Tuesday practice, and it was funny. Kirk Herbstreit and they came to our practice. They'd been to both, and he came and he watched, and it was a full Tuesday, but it was Christmas morning, right? And he goes, we get off of, and he goes, I don't think Wisconsin knows what they're getting into, because they went to their practice and came to our practice, and then he saw we were in full pads getting after it. So, well, I brought this because JW, it's part of the group here at Roxo, asked me to, but
J.W. Wilson.
J.W. Wilson, yep, played for me, TCU guy, and so.
Yeah, matter of fact, J.W. and Todd Fitzgerald and Jay Fitzgerald, it's almost scary when you are around them that if you cut them, they might actually bleed purple.
Yeah.
And it's, what I love about those guys as much as anything, they're unbelievable people, and they've been successful in everything they've touched. But what I'm more impressed by getting to know them over the last few years, really through you, is that they have a passion for what they do, and what it wears off of you, and they're passionate about their university.
They are
TCU, and that's you know what kind of person it is that is wanting to give back to something that gave to them back many years ago. I heard, and you grab that guitar, because we had lunch with those guys a few weeks ago, and there was something I'm not going to mention, but a coach got kicked out of a football game a couple weeks ago, and you don't have to respond to this, for saying probably not hello nice enough to the referees on the sidelines. And no one has ever, I don't think a coach, since they had that rule, has had that happen, which I can't believe a referee would ever do that anyway. But that's another story for another time. On the podcast, it's about me, and it's not about me, but I guess it has been about us. But they were at the table, and you were.
This is probably going to get cut, right?
you were at the table, and you said you used the word you always use the word knucklehead or something, and you can never get in trouble. And Jay and JW and Todd, they kind of disagreed with you about what you called them over the years while they were in pads.
I don't remember that, though.
Yeah, well, yeah, as a great general, or as a great military person once said in a hearing with Congress, there's nobody in this country wants to tell their story more than me, but at this time, I am unable to. So that's how you can answer. All right, Gary, play me something.
Well, here's the thing. So, obviously, one of the greatest things about when I was a young head coach that I had an opportunity to be a part of is I had some great coaches that had been at their universities for a long time. Bobby Bowden, Joe Paterno, LaVelle Edwards, R.C. Slocum. I mean, you can go down the list, Frank Beamer, all these guys, and Philip Fulmer. And so I was sitting actually at Pebble Beach playing in a coaches tournament with Coach R.C. Slocum, famous former head coach at A&M. And he was telling me a story about a conversation that he and Philip Fulmer were having when Philip had gotten let go at Tennessee, and they'd won a national championship a couple years before. And he was talking to him, and he said, he was complaining, and he said, just wait a second. He reached in his pocket, and he pulled out a roll of 100 pennies. And he broke it, and he laid it on the table, and he said, okay, Philip, he said, how old are you? And he said, 57. He said, so I'm going to take these 57 pennies off the table. He said, now you may live to 100, but after 80, it's probably not going to be what you want it to be. So we're going to take these 20 pennies off the table. He says, so how are you going to do your last 23 pennies? And so I said, RC, I think there's a story, you know, and also knew RC was going through cancer at the time, and you know, also good friend Toby Keat. And so what I'll do is I'll play you 2 verses. That way we don't take up too long here. But it's basically called The Pennies of Your Life. I sat down at a table at a broken down cafe, listening to these gents talking about their younger days. One was stating his regrets of how he lived his life. The other one said, let me tell you about my pennies, the pennies of my life. He said, you know, we are so lucky for the time that we have spent. I've had 57 good years, hopefully more left. My first penny was so shiny and perfect in every way. We've had choices of how to spend them each and every day. Oh, the pennies of your life, make them last. Tell your people you love them and never look back. Well, it seems like in this day and age, always going too fast. Oh, the pennies of your life, make them last. Anyway, that's a kind of a short version of that.
That's outstanding.
So anyway,
tell me how long have you been playing? 2 is, when did you get interested in, you know, I mean, you're pretty, I mean, it's not like I guess it's a hobby, but you're serious about this.
Well, you know, if I ever had a window, my window's best. But I tell people my whole goal now is to someday to co-write with somebody a song you listen on the radio, do it. You know, one of the things about sports was I have a lot of guitars on my wall in my recruiting room, because I would trade helmets for guitars. Toby Keith, Brad Paisley, I have one signed. What's the guy on The Voice? Blake Shelton. You know, all these guys. You know, they all have, and it's vice versa.
I thought it might have been Snoop Dogg. Well, but
well, you know, I may work on it. I don't know if it'll be a guitar with him, but it's.
That's you know, what a great hobby. You know, I admire people who can do that. You know, like in my next life, or maybe one of my lives, I'd like to come back as Mick Jagger for a few years, probably in the 60s and the 70s. That would be kind of a fun era. You know, they're still rocking it at 80 and doing their thing and still going on tour. It's got to be also a good release for you when you were coaching, to sit down with the guitar and just strum along.
You know, that's what I do. I do late at night before I go to bed. I use my phone and I write down ideas. Like I have one right now that I'm doing. That's you know, remember in one of his interviews they asked him about how do you develop players, how do you win ball games and do things, and Nick Saban said, well, it takes what it takes. And so I'm about to finish one of these days. Maybe I'll do that one here. But I like to write with people that are a lot, you know, that are more polished. They've been doing it for years, that were in that profession, and you send it to them. Like there's a guy by the name of Justin Hodges. That's a TCU guy that lives in Nashville that really, he writes Hallmark movies and he's more of a poet. So I usually give him the meat and potatoes of the song. And then, you know, I wouldn't say it's like it, but the guy that used to write for Elton John, you know, he'd have it, and he was a poet. Yeah, he's a poet, and then, you know, Elton would take the music and turn it into something.
Yeah,
well,
he would write the music, and
So the voice, the good thing is now I actually have some range after, we played in a band when I was young. And we had wedding dances. A wedding dance was in Kansas. You had the wedding, then the reception, and then that night you'd have a 4-hour dance. Well, for a 7th grader to get paid $100 for a 4-hour dance, each one, that was a lot. That bought a lot of pizzas. But at the end of the day, you made people happy, and you only had to play good for 2 hours because then they didn't remember anything after 10 o'clock, and so it didn't make any difference. But the one thing about music, I think it's about the same thing that goes with sports, the things that tell a story, is you can tell a story and people love listening to it. And one of the songs we wrote, and we have 3 on Spotify. The sad part was all of them were written. All were written when I was really hoarse and I had no, when I was coaching, and we read it. But one of them, the last one I did, instead of doing a press conference when I stepped away from TCU, was we wrote a song called The Day I Walk Away. And it really, initially, when I was writing it with the guy that it was funny, there's a songwriter, famous songwriter in Nashville by the name of Jim Beavers. He's actually a Baylor grad, and I met him because they were bringing his son through. His roommate at Baylor now lived in Fort Worth, and their kids went to TCU, and he brought him through. And I said, someday if you come through, I'd love to sit down and write a song. Well, did it. Well, the game that he was supposed to come to, I was let go the week before. And so I said, you can still have your Baylor tickets for you and your son. Come have a great time. So the Sunday after that, he calls me and he says, I have an unbelievable thought for you. He said, and he played it. He said, the day I walk away. And what I told him we wanted to do is write it like it was a breakup of a relationship or this. And so you could play it either direction. And that's kind of why we wrote it the way we did it, because it's, after 20 some years, it felt like that. And so I think one of the things that music does for you is you can tell a story that people love to listen, and it doesn't affect them. It affects them personally, but not right directly at them like you and I were having an argument, or if you want to tell somebody. There's just a softer side to something that has a guitar or piano or something behind it. And I think that's one of the things I like about it. It allows me to keep scratching that creative itch of being able to sit down and do something that you can tell a story about people. And that's, one of the things, like the song about Coach Saban or the song about R.C. Slocum. Because he called me, I called him and asked him, call him to see at the end of, after the Texas season, I was down there, and he called him to see if he was telling me he was still clear of, cancer was cleared up. And I said, Coach, why didn't you go back to coaching? 20 some years after A&M. And he said, well, I can't tell you the reason why I didn't go back, but I'm telling you the reason I'm glad that I didn't go back. He said, about 3 months into chemo, and they weren't having great things to say about it, how it was going. He said, I had to ask myself one question. He said, I had to ask, if I don't beat this, have I lived my life? Do I have no regrets? And he said, I could say that. And so when I got off the phone with him, and he said, and by the way, he said, if you're down there because of money, I get it. But he said, if you're down there to prove to people that you're a good coach, he said, really, how many more attaboys do you need? Mm-hmm. He said, everybody knows that you do a great job. And so I got off the phone, called the 4 or 5 places that were talking to me about becoming a head coach. And I just, I told them, look, I'm going to take a year off because, we spent our whole life. You did. I did. Luckily, we had great support people because we didn't really raise your girls or my boys, right?
No.
And so I think the thing that people don't understand is, guy once said, I say, well, I regret. He said, no, you had at TCU, we had over 800 guys come through. And, we had both of us had a higher call, and we loved what we did, right? And we, and my wife says it all the time. Her dad and I, she said, I'm married and I have my dad, and they don't believe they ever go to work. I think they would do it for free. And I think once you step away from it, one of the things that music does for me is it allows me to tell the stories and to give back to people that, kind of like this show, is to be able to give back to people that like I say about Fort Worth, I knew Fort Worth, but I didn't know Fort Worth because I never had more than 10 minutes. You were working 7 days a week, 20 hours a day, and you got back into this situation where if I went to Shady Oaks to play golf, and I did, or hit balls, I maybe had 10 minutes to talk to people, and then I had to call another recruit, or you had another meeting, just like you were talking about. You just got done with football. The next morning you said, I'll see you in San Diego because we're starting the golf season. And the same thing, once you got done with the season, you turned it over, then you went into recruiting. When recruiting, you went into fundraising, and you still recruiting, and then you start planning for the next year, and it all rolled together. It was a passion, and I think what people don't understand is why I'm so interested in what you did behind the scenes, and all the stories you have. It's just I can sit there for hours, and that's what I hope people get out of this podcast is the stories that Lance Barrow can tell about all the great, because when they're on the course, there's no story. The story is, did they shoot well or did they not shoot well, right? But you know all the stories about what they were as people, what they were coaches in the NFL. I mean, go down the list. And for us to be able to highlight those people that made the difference in what the NFL is all about, what college football is all about, what PGA golf's all about, all those people behind the scenes, some other producer or somebody that worked for you that just was unbelievable at his job, I think is what makes it. And for me, playing the guitar, that's what it does. I can tell stories about people and make people kind of turn around and listen, where sometimes when they go and they listen to somebody talk, they just, they kind of shut them off. And this way you kind of, if they relate to what you're talking about, and that's what a guy told me about songwriting. He said, you can write a song that means something to you, or you can write a song that everybody else sees themselves in this song. And that's when they listen to it. That's when they buy it. And I think that's what Lance Barrow did for all those years. He pulled people in. He pulled people in, and with the Jim Nantzes of the world and all the colorful people that you were behind the scenes, and you listened to them and told them how to talk and how to do things, I think is just incredible.
Well, I think, Kelsey, your wife and you are waiting for that call, like Larry Gatlin, the famous Larry Gatlin and the Gatlin brothers. When he was a struggling artist in Nashville, he got a call one night from Willie Nelson and said, your song you wrote for me, I'm going to put on my album. He said, well, thank you. And he hangs the phone up, and his wife said, what was that about? Well, Willie's putting one of my songs on his album. She said, what does that mean? That means we're going to live in a bigger house. So start packing. And so that's what, Kelsey, you're waiting to hear that call from whomever that would be. That you can tell Kelsey we're going to live in a bigger house, even though your house is semi-big now. But all right, so let's finish this. We have rambled along. It's not about us, but actually it should be. It's about me. It's kind of like the great Toby Keith. Every once in a while,
sad day. That was a sad day.
Yes, every once in a while, I want to talk about me in his song, or the legendary.
How do you like me now?
Yeah, well, yeah, but the song about me oh my, whatever it is, I'm not going to, but maybe every once in a while I want to talk about me. And the other great song I think about, the legendary great Texan from Lubbock, who sadly we lost a few years ago, the great legendary songwriter and performer Mac Davis had that song. He told me one day he had just done the movie North Dallas 40, and he was used to getting up, and he was opening up a show at Caesars in Reno the next day. He got up early in the morning with probably not a lot on, and he in this huge suite, and he walked out, and they had shag carpet and all this stuff, and he looked at this full-length mirror of himself, and he went at the table and wrote, "It's hard to be humble." And so I'm waiting for that kind of deal with you, where we can ask you how you wrote that song. All right, so let's finish this. Tell me in a minute, just on the top of your head, who would you like wish list? It could be unattainable. It could be people that we can get. Give me your 5 people that one day you would hope that we get on this podcast.
Well, I think in college football, just because I think he's a wealth of knowledge and people are learning, I think Nick Saban, Jerry Keel, which I think he's one of the understated coaches in college football. Every program he took over.
And you're about to say it. Jerry Keel has won everywhere. In my
correct.
new role at CBS Sports as kind of a mentorship, I'm getting to do some of these games. I did a game at New Mexico State last year, and it's amazing to sit down. I never had an opportunity to meet him when he was here in Fort Worth, to meet him and talk to him and his knowledge, and he's won everywhere. And he took the quarterback for New Mexico State, and now they're winning in Vanderbilt.
Yeah, and Clark Lee, not to take any away from the head coach, but he was smart enough to bring him in and change things. And so, those two guys, like a Steve Spurrier, I already named him up, Steve Spurrier or a Frank Beamer. You can go down. Obviously, the young guys too. Dan Lanning. Just what went through your mind when you threw the 12th player on the field, so they had to count him. Whoever would have thought. Anybody. I think we get lost. The next week, everybody forgets what happened this week.
Yeah.
You'd like to, Steve Sarkisian, everything that's gone on down at Texas and everything. Why, they've had all the resources, but they haven't been, and to be honest with you, Mac Brown.
Yep.
You're looking at a guy that I just was looking at how many more wins he has before he has, maybe 300. I think he's getting closer to the 300 range at being at
North Carolina
and Texas, and then back to North Carolina. And so, I think that list is, for me, golf wise. I'd love to listen to, how Tiger Woods, what he thought when he was making one of the many putts he did when he was doing. You just go down the list. You know me. I'm a coach, so I want to know what's going through mind. So they could be on for 30 seconds and just tell me what was going through your mind on the 18th hole at the Masters in this year, and you could tell me the year and when he hit that putt that went sideways and rolled all the way down the hill and it started to hesitate and then it fell in and you went.
Vern Lundquist went, what? In your life, have you ever seen anything like this? And we thought we missed it. And that's a story for another time, but we thought we missed it because Frank Chikinian taught myself, the legendary director Steve Milton at CBS, and the legendary producer Jim Rickoff, who I was fortunate enough to sit for years in the middle of these two great people. Nothing is more boring than a stationary ball. And the ball stopped. And I always said, for the grace of God, and because I have a degree from Abilene Christian and we had chapel every day, and I went to chapel most of the time and had Bible class at Abilene Christian, God gave me a break and said, we'll let Norm Patterson, our technical director, switcher, be a half a second slow. People ask me about that all the time, about that shot. It takes me about 3-4 minutes to tell what was going on. And I said that all happened in less than a snap of a finger. Yeah. And one of the great shots of that was after we kept replaying it, and Tiger and Steve Williams are missing high fives and all this stuff. One of the great shots, if you look over, there's a couple guys about our size, Gary, full figure guys, as they would say, one in a red shirt, one in a yellow shirt, and everybody's jumping up and down and screaming and yelling. And they looked at each other and kind of stopped for a moment, and then they started hugging each other and jumping up and down. And then right behind Tiger and Steve Williams, where they're going crazy on the 16th hole, Peter Dawson, longtime head of the Royal and Ancient Golf Club of St. Andrews, now head of the Olympic International Golf Committee. He's the rules official there, and he's in his sports jacket, his RNA tie, all buttoned up, and he's standing just like at attention. Never had one reaction at all to that shot. But yeah, Vern Lundquist, and yes, David Faraday would always, in your life, have you ever seen anything like this? And so, okay, here's my list. Obviously, the first guy I want to have on is Jim Nantz. He's a brother to me. We have traveled the world together. We have done some unbelievable events together. But besides that, Jim Nantz is one of the greatest guys and one of the greatest people I've ever met.
Yeah.
And you know him well too because we've spent time with him when we would do the Colonial. I would love to have Vern Lundquist at 80-something years old. I'd like to hear Vern Lundquist talk about it. I would like to also, as I mentioned earlier, guys who have nothing to do with sports, like Bill Strauss and Jeffrey Strauss, Tim Love. I'd like, because I love food. There's nothing wrong with loving food. I'd like to hear Tim Love talk about building an empire like he has and what he's done for the city of Fort Worth. I would like to have, athletes. I don't know if we could ever get Tiger Woods, but I think we could probably get Scotty Scheffler. I think we could probably get Jordan Spieth.
All great ones.
Those are guys that I think. I'd also like to have a name that nobody knows, but Steve Loy, who was a coach at Arkansas and ended up becoming coach at Arizona State in golf and became one of the top agents in the world. And I'd like to have the former chairman of CBS Sports, Sean McManus, who did so many things in his career, who's now retired, like you, playing a lot of golf. I'd like to have him, and I could keep going on and on and on about people.
Who's your favorite NFL coaches that you thought were colorful that would be fun?
Well, I mean, Dick Vermeil would be great. I would love to see if we could get Parcells, which I don't know if Bill would ever do it.
Maybe you know what he called my uncle? He called him Crazy Legs because my Uncle Ray was fast when they played at Wichita State together. Maybe he would.
Which is, going back to the great Wisconsin LA Ram, Crazy Leg Hurst, who was the AD at University of Wisconsin for many years. I think John Harbaugh or his brother Jim, there's a possibility. I'd like to see, obviously, in this area, but I think this is bigger than that. I'd like to see what owners we could get on the air. We have a lot of relationships. We've built a lot of relationships. Yeah. I consider myself a person who loves having relationships and building relationships and things like that. Now we see really, in some ways, how good of friends these people are. So we'll see if they say yes or no. Some of them won't be, they can sit down and have lunch with us, or we can ask them to go to dinner, but then other than that, they might not want to do a podcast. I don't think we're going to ever do anything controversial. I hope not. We're here just to tell stories. We're here to interview people that we want to interview. I think it's one of those things, both of us, we want to kind of do what we want to do. I don't know either one of us take directions very well.
No, probably not.
I think we have pretty much been people who give directions, but I think we're also very coachable. I think the scouting report would say we are coachable and we are good teammates. So hopefully we'll get these people we talked about. I think once we decide where we're going and what we're doing with this, then that's our next step. Gary, it's been fun. I hope after we look at this that the guys who was in charge of this, like JW and Chris and Jay and other people, go, okay, guys, we'll talk to you later.
That's a wrap?
Yeah, we'll talk to you later. You're the fastest. You're canceled. That's the way it is. But as I tell people, that's show business. And so, but I hope it is. We got to still work out the name. It's not about us. We kind of, somebody threw that out this morning. So, we're still looking at it. But it's been a fun hour or so being with you. I can't wait till the next time. If there is a next time, if there is, we might have actually done something right in these guys' eyes, or it might have been a deal where JW and Jay could tell you what you used to tell them in practice when they played for you. You got to be embarrassed by what you just.
I'm just going to say what I tell my wife. I'm just going to say yes, dear. And you know what she says to that, right? When I tell her I tell them that's the two best words you can ever say in a relationship. She says, "Well, then why don't you practice it more?" So we're going to have to practice.
Or they could also say to us, as Bill Parcells used to say, "I can only go by what I see," and that's a good line.
I totally agree with that.
Gary Patterson, the legendary coach. I'm Lance Barrow. It's been great being with you. I hope you enjoyed it. Our first little podcast. It's not about me. Thank you.